This conference will now be recorded.
5 in the main room.
We have a building for 400 people, and because it's open plan, we can go get 90 into it, which leaves a considerable issue.
Yeah. You also whack the video on for me as well.
I don't think it's catching on, Pierre. I put our cameras on, but nobody else is playing along except Sean.
Yeah, I know.
They're shy. They're too shy.
It's not that.
There it goes.
It's not that. It's I have a Dell computer which has the camera at the bottom of the screen, which looks right up your nose.
Oh, God.
It's not a good
Call it the nose cam.
Thanks for that.
Here's the office.
So we would have gone out for dinner last night, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, usually.
And, what's that place?
Okay, thank you very much. It's all good. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
I waited for you guys,
Ballard.
but
Ballard vacation. Greasy breakfasts in the morning.
We've just opened up some restaurants here in Seattle, but given the trends, who knows how long that's going to last?
Yeah. Well, you guys are much more under, although you had a recent spike, didn't you, from all the protests probably.
Going back up again.
Today was the highest, I think, ever for the U.S.
There you go. Social ecological dynamics right there.
And I heard Canada is like at the very low end, like doing really, really well.
Well, yeah, we've got a smaller population.
Yeah.
And I think we got ahead of it right away.
Yeah.
That was the thing, I think. And we're certainly not as dense, not as densely populated.
Better at staying home too, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
For
a different relationship with science, I think, too.
yeah.
But it's amazing how many people can actually, or how quickly the stuff can explain. Most of the time it doesn't. It doesn't seem to be sort of an average thing. It's just kind of an extreme or not. I mean, we've just had 700 and something people within one factory that have become infected in a matter of days. And it hasn't spread into a local community or anything else. So must just be times or situations under which these things are particularly bad. We don't seem to be able to map those or understand those very well yet.
Well,
that's what's happening in Alaska.
Some of the meatpacking plant issues were working conditions where people were just packed so tightly together.
The same with Alaska.
And it's nice and cold.
Yeah.
What's going on in Alaska?
Oh, I think they're bringing in workers and quarantining them all together. And a couple of news reports today were saying, you know, 6 positive tests of a group of 10 that were all quarantined together. So cluster sampling, right?
Oh, is that for the sockeye fishery?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Dillingham up in Bristol Bay. There's a couple other places around that this is happening in Alaska.
Yeah.
The factory trawlers, you know, it takes one person to get on one of those boats.
Yeah.
But you're not well, it seems unlikely then they will have a September physical meeting, will we?
Doubt it.
Who knows? I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
I mean, right now, Sven, you couldn't even travel here, I think, because all the travel from Europe is locked. So.
No, they have to let me in. I'm a U.S. citizen.
Ah, that's true.
I mean, they'll let you out.
Hang on a second.
Exactly. The problem is they will not take you back in Europe then.
Okay, well, maybe we should make a start. I was just waiting to see if Carrie's joined us. She's not online yet. I see Anne-Marie's there, and the board is there, obviously. How would you like to proceed this morning, Sean? Where are you up to, and what item would you like to start with? Just get ready.
So how are we doing? Are we ready to go, or?
Yeah, sorry, you were up without your headset on. So I was just asking, how would you like to proceed this morning? Would you like to start with research, or did you want to jump and have a bit of a discussion about the report, or shall we wait until a little bit later this morning to do that?
Didn't we have something else on the MSE?
Yeah, Alan, do you want to chime in and give us a quick overview of what's left?
Yeah, it's just a few slides on the management procedures that Piera can present, and then just finish up with the program of work for it. Shouldn't take more than half an hour.
Okay. Yeah, let's start there.
Should I make Piera the presenter then? Is that the intention?
You can make me the presenter, and it'll just be easier instead of switching. And all slide.
Laptop, or you have two.
Yeah,
things.
The non-laptop, just my regular name.
All right. All right, you should be good to go.
Okay. Oops, let me just get to the page where we were.
So it should be slide 23.
Yep. So that slide?
Yeah, correct. Can I start?
Sure. I'll just give a very brief introduction. Pierre's going to present the work that she's been doing on the management procedures and some of the outcomes of the MSAB 15. And then when she's finished, I just have a couple of slides to just complete the MSE presentations. So take it away, Pierre. Thanks.
Right. So thanks for joining, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I will just briefly present the management procedures. So describe the data generation framework, describe what we chose to use for the estimation model, and then give a brief overview of what the MSAB has decided to use for a management procedure and which elements they identify that are important to be included in the management procedures. So you can change slide, please. Yeah. So, well, the data generation steps simulates the sampling process that happens in reality by resampling from probability distributions. So we basically have our operating model that provide us with numbers at age by biological region. And then we use the selectivity at age for the survey and for the commercial fleet, and the coefficient of catchability by region to derive the indices of abundance. So the survey number per unit effort and the commercial WPE. And then we resample from a log normal distribution to simulate the observation error. The similar procedure is for the catch at age proportions. So the operating model provides the catch at age by fishery. And I just remind you that each fishery operates in a specific area. And then we calculate the proportion, and we resample from a Dirichlet distribution. As you might remember, the operating model, the main unit of the operating model, let's say, is at a biological region. So we get our data at a biological region or at a fishery level, and then for the estimation model, we need to aggregate them to a coast-wide level. So we do that. For example, for the indices of abundance, we just take a weighted average of the 4 indices by region, and we get the coast-wide indices of abundance. On the other hand, for some of the management procedures, we need, for example, the O32 or the all sizes from the model survey by regulatory area. So we need to disaggregate from a biological region to a regulatory area, and to do that, we basically assume some proportion by regulatory area. So we did several testing to make sure that our framework was actually working. So if you want to go to the next slide. Thanks, Alan. So this is just one example of some of the testing that we've done. And we tested how the data generation works for the long coastwide operating model, the plots to the left, and the short coastwide operating model, the plots to the right. So those two operating models have been conditioned to the long coastwide assessment and the short coastwide assessment, and Alan presented them yesterday, if you remember. And we tested the data generation for the number per unit effort survey on top, the plots on top, and the commercial WQE, the two plots at the bottom. So as you can see, the data generated from the OM are represented in red and overlap almost all the time with the stock synthesis estimates for the indices, which are represented in blue, and with the observed data, which are represented in green. And where they diverge is mostly due, as you've mentioned yesterday, as Alan mentioned yesterday, to some discrepancies in the number at age. And Sean has a question. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm just curious how you're able to match this big drop in NPUE. Is that?
So this is just the so we have the numbers at age from an operating model at the coastwide level, and I just use the catchability from the long coastwide stock synthesis assessment model, and just verify that it actually, and that's actually the results. So it's mostly derived by the operating model, which is conditioned. Like, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Well, but so if you were to look at how the biomass trajectory for this survey goes through these points, does the expected value of these points drop like that, or is that more of an observation error?
No. That's exactly what the values does. So if you look in the document, you probably will see the picture much clearer. Unfortunately, it's not clearer here, but the green dot is actually the observed value. So these are the modeled survey indices, right, that are used as input in the stock synthesis assessment model. And as you can see, for 2017, it's right up, while in 2018, it drops to much lower value. So that's what the indices does. And that's what the stock synthesis fit when you're on the assessment.
And does that have a change in Q, Pierre?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
So there is, I don't remember, for the long coastwide, I don't think there is any deviation in the Q. Am I correct, Ian?
No, Q is not changing over time.
Q is not changing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, what's happening in the actual, our estimate of the actual population is that we've got a big drop in recruitment starting in 2005, and we start to see that really feeding into the survey index in 2017 as those fish reach full selectivity. The selectivity is allowed to shift a little bit over time, and that helps to capture this trend. But most of this is actually being driven by what we think is going on in the dynamics.
So the expected value of the index, which is essentially just directly proportional to biomass, goes through these points. It drops off a cliff like that.
Yeah, actually the top panels, NPUE, are the numbers only, and then the bottom panels are the biomass. Right. You see the drop is mainly in numbers. It's much less pronounced in biomass because we've still got some of the older cohorts that are still growing and getting bigger. So it buffers the trend in terms of biomass. So, and that's how the model reconciles both of these trends simultaneously.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Okay, so yeah, so this first example showed that the data generation actually works for the indices. So if you can go to the next slide, Alan, please.
Sorry, Piera, just before you move on.
Yeah.
those confidence limits, are those confidence limits, or are they or uncertainty around the center for the stock assessment?
So basically, these are just 500 simulations of the data from a log normal distribution, and I use as a standard deviation, I use the standard error that is used, the standard error that is used in the assessment for that indices of abundance.
Okay. So I was just wondering, because the samples you're producing seem to have relatively similar spread to the stock synthesis samples, right?
Yeah, and it's the same. I mean, I'm using the same uncertainty around it, basically.
But I guess given that some of the weighting that stock synthesis is using per sample, that doesn't seem quite realistic that they should be the same. But I'll have to have a think about it. But thanks.
Great. Thanks.
I have one other question.
Yes.
Sorry to pepper you with the questions, but that's what we're here for. But
yeah, no, absolutely.
So this period here, so through this time from 2005 to really to about 2015, there's a real difference between, especially in the NPUE, between the two, that seems to be far less of a difference in biomass. But so what's the cause of that? And is that something you would say that it's working, or?
Yeah, so basically I double checked why that was happening, and it's basically due to some differences in the number set age. So what happens is that you have an overestimation of the small in the operating model. That happens. You have compared to the stock synthesis assessment model, you have an overestimation of the small. Yes, an overestimation of the small and an underestimation of the big fish, of the small ages and an underestimation of the older ages. So that's why you actually observed in the NPUE that looks like it's overestimating, and it's just due to the much higher number of small fish compared to the stock synthesis assessment model.
And it just
so the data generation. So yeah, basically the data generation works, and it's just that when conditioning the operating model, it was conditioned, I think, mostly on the biomass, isn't it, Alan? And so there is some discrepancies in the numbers at age.
Yeah, what's happening is we didn't mimic the exact selectivity curve that stock synthesis has. They have a double normal that has a real flat plateau on it. And so the selectivity curve we have in the operating model is just a double normal, and it has a less broad peak on it, or plateau at the peak. And so what happens during that period when some very large removals were coming out of the fisheries, the numbers at age just slightly deviate from the in the operating model from the assessment. And what we did in tuning, we tuned to mainly the biomass, but also partly to the numbers at age over the time series, just to make sure that we weren't deviating by more than, say, 5% in numbers at age. And this is sort of that concept of we're conditioning this model, not trying to find an exact parameterization of selectivity that explains that matches the assessment model, which is a model in its own.
Okay, thanks.
Any more questions? Okay, so I will go to the next slide. So we did a kind of similar testing for the proportionate age. Here I'm presenting only one fishery, the survey fleet. Otherwise it would be too many plots, but they more or less behave all the same. So the box plot represent the data generated from the OM, again 500 simulations, and the line with the dots represent the observed age composition for both females in red and males in blue, for 2011 all the way to 2019. So again, a subsample of the whole time series for space reasons. And yeah, as you can see, the data generation works quite well. I mean, it matches, I would say, very well the observed data. Yeah. Any question on that? Okay. So we verified that we did more testing on the data generation, and they all look good. So it seems that the framework is working fine. So now that we have our data, we need an assessment. And what we decided to do to represent the ensemble was to use 2 of the 4 models used in the ensemble itself. So we chose to use the long and short coast-wide stock synthesis assessment models. And we decided to just take the average of the stock status and of the total mortality of those to derive the TCY. The coast-wide TCY. To do that, we needed a streamlined version, as we called a streamlined version of the original models. And the reason for doing that is because each model takes in the original form, I think each one more than 1 minute for sure. I think the long coast-wide takes about 2 minutes, so it would have been too much time. And so to streamline, we basically reduce greatly the amount of data inside each model. We reduce a lot of the age comp, we fix some of the parameters and so on. And so we ended up with 2 models that run in between 9 seconds to 15 seconds. So that was a good result. But afterwards, we needed to actually verify that the behavior of those 2 streamlined version was actually resembling the behavior of the original version of the stock synthesis model. And also we wanted to verify how the behavior of those two streamlined versions was in a projection context and how well they were representing the estimation uncertainty. So for the first verification, we basically compared some quantities such as the total mortality, the spawning biomass, the SPR between the streamlined version and the correspondent original version. And those match pretty well, especially in the most recent periods. So we want that to match, especially in the most recent periods. So that was good. But then we wanted to see if they were actually able to run well in a projection context. So to do that, we did a simple exercise. So if you want to change slide, Alan, please. Yeah, so we did just 20 simulation because, of course, the time is still, it takes quite a long time still. If you consider for 100-year projections, to run a closed loop, it takes about 1 hour and 20 minutes. So we did 20 simulations only. We generated 20 data sets using the framework described above. And we used a closed loop simulation with a simple SPR 43% and a 30-20 harvest control rule, just to keep it simple. And we checked the performance of this estimation model, and we calculated the estimation error that was around 9%. We checked the autocorrelation in the residuals, which is quite high, as expected. And then the estimation error is lower than what it was used for the coast-wide MSE. I think for the coast-wide MSE was used an estimation error of about 15%. But you need to consider that here we are not taking into account any other source of variability. So there is no time varying weighted age, no time varying selectivity, no time varying movement. So there is not other source of variability at all. So we expect this estimation error to increase when we add more sources of variability. So now we have 2 of our 3 components of the harvest control rule. We have data generation, we have an estimation model, and the estimation model will provide us with a TCY at a coast-wide level. So if you want to move to the next slide. Now we have to distribute this TCY from a coast-wide level all the way to a regulatory area level. And to do that, we could either move from the coast-wide level to a regional level and down to the regulatory area level, or we could move directly from the coast-wide level all the way to the regulatory area level, still keeping in mind that we have a primary objective specifically to maintain a certain proportion of the spawning stock biomass at the biological region level. So, and then at the end, there will be an annual regulatory area adjustment, which is kind of the policy component, in which the regulatory area allocation could be modified, taking in consideration other factors such as economic factors, social factors, and so that could be implemented using an implementation error, for example, an implementation variability, for example. For the to distribute the TCY, and if you want to move to the next slide, Alan, the MSAB developed some management procedures, and they highlighted the elements that they wanted to be included in this management procedure, that they wanted to be tested. And I'm listing here the elements, the main elements that are recurrent in most of the management procedures. So first of all, they wanted to have a constraints on the change in the TCY. So for example, a maximum annual change of no more than 15%, or a slow up, fast down approach, or a multi-year mortality limit. So most of the management procedure that they discussed had a constraint in it. All of the management procedure uses indices of abundance in biological regions or IPHC regulatory area, such as the O32 or the all sizes from the survey results. They wanted to test the effect of having a minimum TCY for one IPHC regulatory area, in particular for 2A. They wanted to test a management procedure with kind of defined share by either biological region, management zone, or IPHC regulatory area. So they have one management procedure that actually assign a proportion to Canada and a proportion to the rest of the regulatory areas. Then they wanted to see, to test the performances of having a maximum coastwide fishing intensity as a limit, basically not to exceed when distributing the TCY. And then they wanted to test the effect of relative harvest rate between biological regions or IPHC regulatory areas. So most of the management procedure have kind of differences in harvest rates. So these were the main elements discussed. And if you want to move to the next slides, Alan. So this is just a snapshot of the table they generated. We have a table with 11 management procedures. You can find this table in the MSAB015 report. So this table, as you can see, has a coastwide component, a regional component, and a regulatory area component. They also decided to give a priority level to the management procedure. So a priority of 1 means a higher precision in the performance metrics. So we will need to run more simulation on management procedure with priority equal 1, and less precision for a management procedure with a priority of 2. So that will help with the time constraints. I think that was the last slide, and I'll take any questions if there is any.
And if there are not any questions, I can continue on with the program of work.
I've got a quick question here. Just about the implementation uncertainty. It looks like you have implementation uncertainty in the operating model, but then also in the management procedures, you deal with restricting changes. Is that right? And can you maybe, Alan, talk a little bit more about the implementation uncertainty in the operating model?
Yeah, so the implementation uncertainty in the operating model will be things like the decision that the commissioners make will deviate from the management procedure. And then another important source of implementation uncertainty in the operating model is that the fishery does not actually harvest the entire limit or goes beyond the limit. You know, it doesn't match exactly what the limit is set at. And so those are both in the operating model. Here in the management procedure, the what we call a constraint, and that is like this maximum change of 15% from year to year. We're not seeing that as implementation uncertainty, but actually as part of the management procedure itself,
right. Yep.
where let's say that without the constraint, an SPR of 43%, a 30-20 control rule says, let's change the TCY from 10 million pounds to 20 million pounds next year. Well, that management procedure with a constraint, a max change of 15%, would then say, nope, we're not going to go to the full 20. We're only going to go to 11.5% or whatever it would be, 15% greater, and the same, only 15% lower. Even if it says drop it by half, no, we're only going to drop the limit by 15%. And then the fleet would go out and attempt to harvest to that limit with any implementation uncertainty there.
Thanks. And can you just explain a little bit more about how that first kind of implementation uncertainty is implemented? Is it just random error centered on the recommendation?
With regard to the decision-making process?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so we haven't actually decided exactly how to implement that, or to implement the implementation error. But we're thinking about it, and what we want to do. I did an analysis, I think it was 2016, with the help of Ian, and we looked at how the decision, what the decision-making process actually was, how the commission deviated from the management procedure itself. And so we'll redo that analysis to see, is our decisions in recent years consistently higher? Are they consistently lower? Are they random? You know, or is there some trend in these decisions? So we'll do a little bit of analysis and see if we can inform that. But other than that, I think it's more or less, we'll be doing a lot of simulations without implementation error. And then we'll do a few simulations or scenarios with implementation error, just to show the effects of different types of implementation error, so that MSAB and the managers can take that into account and say, hey, this management procedure is actually really robust. This one is greatly affected by any deviation. So, you know, just to get an idea how it affects it, rather than saying this is what's happening and this is how the management procedure will perform under this current thing, because it's very difficult to define how decision making will occur in the future.
Fantastic. I added a comment about that you should be doing just this sort of thing, and I think we can now delete that comment, because it sounds like you're doing exactly what I had in mind. But
well, I would say keep the comment in there as a reminder to us, since we haven't actually done that yet. So I definitely appreciate that.
Good.
Alan?
Yeah.
Are you anticipating then the managers saying, okay, so we'll choose this management procedure which is robust so that we can make any decision we want to without consequence? It seems like it's almost going to be a circular argument.
Yeah.
The more you ensure that you're robust to it, the freer people feel to ignore the management.
That's a really good point. We've been, I think every time I present, I have a slide, present to the commissioners, that I have a slide that states the decision-making process is potential deviations from the management procedure, and we really cannot say the consequences of deviating from the management procedure. The MSE process is to determine the performance of a management procedure, and we can introduce that type of variability. But I've been really stressing to the decision makers that as soon as they do deviate, we really cannot say that it's going to perform in this way. So, but you know, a lot of people like that freedom within IPHC. They like the freedom to discuss and debate the limits within the regions and the areas. They like the freedom to take in socioeconomic factors. So yeah, it's a really good point, Sven, that we do have to be very careful that we don't encourage deviations from the management procedures, but instead just show the consequences of deviating from the management procedure.
Yeah, I think a good thing would be to try and run this for a long period of time. I don't know, 50 years, the exact same, and compare the two and actually say, yes, you get away with it. Your stock doesn't collapse. You've got the freedom, but actually over that time period, you've lost 50% or 15 or whatever it is percent of
Yeah,
your yield.
yeah.
That really makes it clear you're trying to aim for something,
Hmm.
and by people not supporting that, you going away from it. That freedom is cost.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. We'll definitely present it in that way. Freedom is cost. I like that.
Well, and also just that the results you're presenting are based on the assumption that the rules are followed. If they're not, then these results don't really apply, and they're not a useful guide, or at least they're not as reliable a guide.
Yeah, and yeah, we've been definitely
Can I interrupt?
to say that.
I don't want to cut this off too much, but I think the point is made, and I think you're dealing with it in a good way, and it's all going to come out in the end, and we're getting seriously pressed for time.
Okay.
So I have a couple of other questions, but I think I'll just delay them for now. So let's just continue.
Okay. So we've been through the operating model yesterday. Just a couple little things, a reminder of the program of work for basically 2020 and beyond. Here's a Gantt chart that's mainly focused, you can see, on 2020. And it's just basically indicating beyond 2021, we're going to be sort of starting the process again, hopefully, and defining new goals and objectives and identifying new management procedures. But for 2020, we have a number of tasks. We've been working on this framework up till now, presenting it now. The operating models, the multi-area model, that's nearly done right now. And then we'll be basically running these closed loop simulations for the rest of 2020 in preparation for the annual meeting in 2021. I wanted to note here too that we're planning to undertake an external peer review starting very soon. In fact, we had an announcement for reviewers. We had some applicants, and I believe an applicant has been chosen. I'm not sure if they've been notified yet, though. So between now and the next SRB meeting, we'll have an external peer review benchmark, or a bench review similar to how the assessment was done last year. So be expecting that for SRB016, a summary of that. Let's see. So again, this figure indicating that in August we'll be having an MSAB special session to go over results, and then bringing some penultimate results to the SRB meeting, doing more simulations for the MSAB meeting, and then preparing for the annual meeting in 2021. So with that being said, noting the paper, there's the Rev 1, and noting in that Rev 1 that the operating model conditioning, there was an error in that, and the presentation has the most up-to-date operating model results. If you have any alternative specifications, additional features of the OM to recommend, that would be useful. And then more specifically, we outlined here a couple of our ideas, being the MSE team, on things that we will do in the next week to try to solve the issues and the problems that we're having with the multi-area operating model. And that's, trying to balance the tensions between these data sets and observations we're trying to fit to, time varying movement, proportion, potentially using a shorter time series to condition the model, although that has consequences on projections, and then attempting to use different parameters instead of just from that long AAF. And with that, that's all that we have for the MSE. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Alan. I think we did have quite a bit of discussion this morning in our in-camera session on this topic here that you're on. So maybe we'll just discuss that in more detail when we come to reviewing that comment we made.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so it's 10:49. So I think we're pretty much off the agenda now. So we'll just go through the entire biological research program. And then, well, actually, maybe Josep, you can choose a point for a break here since we're going to go longer. We're just gonna, I imagine, work through the scheduled SRB drafting session. So normally, what do we have? When do we have our breaks? Our breaks usually
Normally
about
at
this
11
time,
o'clock, about 9 minutes, we're scheduled for a short break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would suggest take the break now.
Just quickly, yeah.
Maybe 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, let's take 5 minutes and we'll come back and we'll blast through and then get into looking at the draft report.
Okay.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, well, let's, Olaf, are you back yet or? There he is. Okay, and Kim's here, Sven's here. Okay, take it away, Josep.
Okay, thank you very much, Keith. Good morning, everybody. This is Josep Planas speaking, and I'll be presenting the update on the research activities of the Biological and System Science branch. Mostly for the sake of Olaf, our new SRB member, I'll go over the 5-year research program and the initial objectives of the 5 main research areas that we're contemplating within this document that is published in our website. That's called the 5-year Biological and System Science Research Plan. And then we'll move into the actual research updates. And then in several sections, I will ask some of the members of the Biological and System Science branch to speak to their respective areas of expertise. So let's start just by highlighting the 5 main research areas that we're conducting studies on at the IPHC Secretariat. The first one is migration, and the main objective of this research area is to improve our understanding of migration throughout all life stages from
Josep, can you hear me? We've lost your audio.
Yeah.
Still nothing.